imagine, like, you're on a first date.
Okay. Setting the scene.
Right. So the ambiance is great. The conversation is just flowing perfectly.
Everything is going well?
Exactly. And then they lean in and ask the seemingly innocent question. They say, so how long have you been into photography?
Oh, no.
Right. And you just freeze. Your brain completely stutters.
It's the worst feeling.
It really is. You say, since, well, for a few years, I guess. Since college, maybe.
Yeah, that classic stumble.
And in that, 3-second verbal stumble, neurolinguistic research shows your date's brain has just subconsciously flagged you as either insecure or just uninvested.
It is entirely brutal. I mean, how quickly we judge someone based on a micro-hesitation.
Welcome to the invisible, high-stakes world of temporal precision.
Because we think we're just looking for a timeline.
Right.
But what we are actually doing is running this background check on their self-awareness.
Like a competence check.
Exactly. Competence, self-awareness. When someone cannot immediately construct the chronological architecture of their own life, we instinctively pull back.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today we are doing a deep dive into this exact concept of temporal precision.
It's such a fascinating topic.
It totally is. Our source material today comes from this English learning podcast, actually. It's called Temporal Precision, Mastering Since and For.
Which sounds like a grammar lesson.
Right, and I want to be clear right off the bat, this isn't some dry grammar lesson.
Yeah, no.
We are looking at a specific linguistic breakdown, focusing on how we use two tiny words to describe time, to basically understand a massive psychological phenomenon.
Yeah, the words we use completely alter the perception of our history.
Exactly. Our mission today is to figure out how the way you frame time fundamentally alters how others perceive your passions, your history, and really your overall identity.
Because it's really about narrative architecture. Every time you open your mouth to share a piece of your past, you're making a structural choice.
A structural choice. I like that.
Yeah, you are deciding whether to hand your listener a completed puzzle or, scatter the pieces on the table and ask them to assemble it themselves.
Oh, wow.
And the difference between those two approaches, it often comes down to the choice between a point in time and a duration.
Okay, so look, we all know the Grammar 101 rule here. Correct?
Sure. The basics.
If we are talking about time, we generally use since to denote a specific fixed point in the past.
Like, since 2015.
Right, or since Tuesday, since I moved to Chicago, stuff like that.
Right.
And then we use for to describe a duration, a continuous span of time.
For 3 days.
For a decade.
Exactly. It's basic syntax. But what most people completely miss is the cognitive tax you're secretly levying on your listener when you carelessly swap one for the other.
Yeah, the functional difference is taught to grade schoolers, but the neurocognitive mechanics beneath it, those are actually really complex.
So what's actually happening in the brain?
Well, when you choose to use the word since, you are effectively commanding the listener's brain to do the math. Wait, really? Just by saying since?
Just by saying since.
Yeah.
You provide a fixed starting coordinate. Let's say I have worked in this industry since 2016.
Okay.
As the speaker, you have anchored the timeline. But for the listener to actually conceptualize the weight of your experience, their prefrontal cortex has to subconsciously subtract 2016 from the current year.
Oh, man. So you are demanding active calculation from them.
Exactly. You are making them work for it.
Thinking about this visually really helps clarify the mechanism for me. Using since is like dropping a single red pin on a digital map.
I love that analogy.
Right. You are marking the exact coordinate of Genesis. Here's where it began. But using for is like looking at the odometer on your dashboard after a long cross-country road trip and just reading the total mileage.
Yeah, it's the pure accumulated weight of the journey.
Exactly. The map pin versus the odometer.
It's a vital distinction because one focuses on location and time and the other focuses on volume. When you use for, if you say, I have worked in this industry for 8 years, you are completely bypassing their need to calculate.
You're just giving them the answer.
You are handing them the fully processed, completed package of your experience. You've done all the cognitive labor for them.
Okay, wait, I want to push back on that a bit.
Sure.
You say for hands them the completed package and bypasses the math, right?
Right.
Which kind of implies it's always the better, cleaner choice. But if I say, I've been playing the piano since I was 5 years old, Doesn't that imply a massive duration and a foundational origin?
It does, yeah.
So why wouldn't I just use since all the time to get the best of both worlds? I mean, human brains are pattern recognition machines. We do basic math instantly.
That's a fair point.
Is the cognitive load really that high, or is there like a different emotional resonance at play here?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the cognitive load isn't about the difficulty of the math. It's about the allocation of attention. You are totally right that subtracting 5 years old from your current age isn't computationally overwhelming for anyone.
Right, it's not calculus.
No, but language directs the mind's eye. When you use since, you are forcing the listener to visualize an era, a past version of yourself.
Oh, I see.
If you say, since I was 5, the listener's immediate mental image is of a small child sitting at a giant piano.
Oh, wow. That's so true.
You are putting the focus squarely on the inception, the spark.
So you are basically directing their empathy toward the origin story.
Precisely. But when you use for, like I have been playing the piano for 25 years, you strip away the imagery of that childhood living room.
And you replace it with what?
You replace it with sheer endurance, dedication. The focus shifts entirely to the overwhelming volume of hours, the grit, the repetitive practice.
So it highlights the monolithic weight of the experience rather than just the charm of its beginning.
Exactly.
Man, that distinction completely reframes how I think about everyday conversations.
It changes everything once you notice it.
Because I am subconsciously directing the listener's respect or their empathy just by choosing between a point in time or a duration.
Yep.
I'm choosing whether to market myself as a prodigy with deep roots or like a veteran with a massive body of work.
And this right here is the core of temporal precision. It is being precisely aligned with the emotional truth you want to convey in that specific moment.
So it's very situational.
Very. If you were in a job interview and you want to project absolute, unwavering competence and reliability, the duration, the odometer might be your most powerful tool.
Because it just hits harder.
Right. I have managed these systems for a decade. It just lands with a thud.
But on a date.
But if you are on a date and you want to convey deep-seated passion and lifelong identity, the starting point, the sense, the map pin invites them into your history.
That makes so much sense. And this really moves us out of abstract linguistic theory and directly into the stakes of everyday human connection.
Absolutely.
Because the subtitle of our source material today is Talk About Your Life Clearly. And we're seeing that clarity isn't just about enunciation, you know?
No, it's about eliminating ambiguity so the listener can actually absorb who you are.
Right. So what happens when we mess this up?
Well, when we lack this precision, our personal narrative becomes muddy.
Muddy how?
We construct our identities through the stories we tell about ourselves, right? And chronological time is the foundational scaffolding of those stories.
Oh, the scaffolding. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. If the timeline is wobbly, if you are mixing up your pins and your odometers, the whole narrative structure just feels unstable.
So what does this all mean for the listener when they inevitably fumble this in real time?
Because we all do it.
We all do it. Let's say you're describing a career shift to a prospective employer, right? And you lose your grip on the timeline.
Okay.
You say, I've been working in UX design since, well, for a while now, maybe a few years.
Yeah.
What is actually happening in the interviewer's brain in that exact moment?
You are introducing massive cognitive friction.
Friction.
Yes. The interviewer's brain craves a neatly categorized timeline to assess your value and reliability.
Right.
When you offer vague, stumbling markers, their brain suddenly has to work overtime to categorize you.
Because they don't know where to put you.
Exactly. Are you a novice who is exaggerating? Are you a veteran who is just deeply unorganized?
Wow.
The brain detests chronological ambiguity. Because from an evolutionary standpoint, an inability to sequence events clearly is a marker of unreliability.
So because they are spending all their mental energy trying to resolve your timeline, they actually stop listening to the substance of your answer.
They completely tune out the rest of what you're saying.
They are lost in the woods trying to find your map pin, completely ignoring the fact that you might be a brilliant designer.
That's exactly it. The vagueness dilutes the impact of the passion or the expertise you are trying to share.
That is so frustrating.
It is. But we rely on narrative clarity to build trust. If someone can confidently and cleanly articulate the span or the origin of their experiences, we implicitly trust their self-awareness.
We assume that a clear timeline equals a clear mind.
Precisely.
It's like the ultimate proxy for competence. If you sound unsure of the basic facts of your own existence, the listener cannot possibly invest in your story.
It just won't.
So having established that this clarity is the goal and that temporal precision is the mechanism, we need to examine a real-world case study where this process completely breaks down.
Yes, the Bruce scenario.
Right. There's a fascinating scenario provided in the source text involving a guy named Bruce.
Bruce is our perfectly flawed archetype for the breakdown of temporal precision.
Poor Bruce.
I know, but his situation isolates the exact moment where human memory clashes with the rigid demands of spoken language.
Let's lay out Bruce's specific scenario for the listener. He is at a social gathering, and he is attempting to describe his favorite hobby, woodworking, to a new acquaintance. Now, he loves woodworking. He is genuinely passionate about it.
It's his thing.
It's his thing. But right as he gets into the explanation, he is asked how long he's been doing it.
A dreaded question.
And he freezes. He fumbles his words, he stalls, he switches between since and for, and he ultimately just trails off into a vague, unconvincing mumble.
It's painful to analyze because it is so incredibly common.
So what is going wrong for him?
Bruce is experiencing a systems failure at the intersection of semantic memory and episodic memory.
Okay, break that down for me.
We assume he knows his own life, right?
Right.
But the brain doesn't store memories like rows in an Excel spreadsheet that you can simply read aloud.
Right, like if you ask me when I started a hobby, there isn't a little file folder in my head labeled woodworking start date, March 4th.
Exactly.
I have like a collection of smells, feelings, an image of a garage, a memory of buying a specific tool.
And that is exactly the problem. When someone asks Bruce, how long have you been into woodworking? His brain has to execute a wildly complex sequence of tasks in a matter of milliseconds.
Okay, so what's the sequence?
First, the hippocampus attempts to retrieve the episodic memory, that sensory data you just mentioned.
Right.
It's asking, when did I buy that first chisel? Was it before or after we moved? Was it winter?
So it's actively searching for the map pin.
It is. But simultaneously, the temporal lobe is accessing semantic memory, the rigid structural rules of the English language.
Oh, wow. So they are running parallel processes.
Yes, and he has to decide, in a split second, the grammatical framework of his sentence. Am I going to use since or am I going to use for?
And if he picks wrong?
Well, if he leans toward for, he suddenly has to kick his prefrontal cortex into gear to do mental math on the spot. Okay, I bought the chisel in 2017, the current year is.
And all of this neurological gymnastics is happening while a stranger is just staring at him, waiting for the end of a sentence?
Which is terrifying.
It is. And the social pressure introduces a microdose of cortisol into the system, which specifically impairs the prefrontal cortex's ability to hold information in working memory and do that basic math.
Yeah, cortisol just wreaks havoc on that process. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the listener is not offering Bruce grace for his cortisol spike.
Definitely not.
The person listening isn't thinking, Bruce is experiencing a momentary lapse in his working memory buffer due to the demands of semantic retrieval.
No, they're definitely not thinking that.
They're thinking, Bruce seems like a bit of a phony. He doesn't even know how long he's been doing his supposed favorite hobby.
Man, it's a tragic misinterpretation. Bruce's entire narrative identity is compromised in the eyes of this acquaintance simply because he couldn't cleanly execute a linguistic rule.
It's really unfair.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because looking at Bruce, his struggle is universally relatable, right?
Absolutely.
Hobbies and passions rarely begin with a starting pistol.
They are notoriously difficult to track on a linear timeline.
Because they don't operate like a job where you have a hired date.
Yeah.
Hobbies are more like a background software update.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You don't really notice when the download initiated. Maybe you watched a YouTube video on a Tuesday. Maybe you bought a piece of sandpaper 3 months later.
Right.
You only realize the update happened when it's fully installed and suddenly taking up half your hard drive, or in this case, half your garage.
That is a much more accurate model of human experience than a fixed map pin. The evolution is organic, it's iterative, and it's highly fragmented.
So let me push the dialogue further on this.
Go for it.
Is Bruce's confusion stemming from the fact that it is genuinely, authentically impossible to pinpoint a singular sense for an organic passion?
I would argue yes.
And because that origin point is fundamentally fuzzy, calculating the for the odometer is equally impossible to do on the fly. Because, think about it, we are asking the brain to calculate a duration based on an origin coordinate that doesn't actually exist.
You have hit on the exact friction point between the rigid architecture of syntax and the fluid gradient nature of human experience.
It's like they're incompatible.
They are. The grammar of temporal precision demands a binary fixed starting point. Language wants a timestamp.
Right.
But Bruce's life and our lives operate in gradients. If Bruce started by just watching those videos one winter, then casually sanded a block of wood 6 months later, and then 2 years after that finally built his first table, which event gets the map pin?
There are 5 different pins scattered across a 3-year map.
Exactly. And if you don't know which pin to use as your anchor, you cannot accurately calculate the odometer reading for the duration.
So his brain is just stuck in a loop.
The brain loops back and forth. Do I say since the YouTube video? No, that sounds like I'm exaggerating. Do I say since the table? No, that ignores 2 years of learning.
He is trying to force an organically grown, sprawling passion into a perfectly square linguistic box.
Beautifully said.
And in the second, it takes him to try and reconcile that fundamental incompatibility. The conversation falters, the cortisol spikes, and his clarity is completely lost.
The English language is demanding black and white, but memory operates in grayscale.
Which brings us right to you, listening to this deep dive right now. Think about your own life.
Yeah, how often does this happen?
Exactly. How often have you stumbled over a timeline, feeling like a fraud in an interview or a date, simply because your lived experience didn't fit neatly into the strict grammar of a since or a for?
I think most people internalize that stumble as a personal failing, like a sign that they don't know themselves.
Right, like they're an imposter.
But awareness of the mechanics behind it, understanding that it is a conflict between fluid memory and rigid language, is the first step toward correcting it.
So how do we correct it? If life is a gradient but language demands a fixed point, how do we avoid pulling a Bruce?
You pre-compute the math.
Oh,
You do not wait for the social pressure of a conversation to decide where your map pin goes.
so you do it beforehand.
Exactly. If you are preparing for an interview or a date or even a networking event, you have to consciously review the architecture of your personal narrative.
You pick the pin.
You pick the pin. It doesn't have to be objectively perfect. It just has to be consistent.
Right.
Decide, I will anchor my woodworking origin to the year I built that first table. Once you have locked that pin in your semantic memory, you can easily calculate the odometer reading in advance.
So you essentially build a cheat sheet for your own timeline so you don't have to rely on the hippocampus under pressure.
That's exactly it.
You decide in advance if you want to emphasize the genesis with a since or the endurance with a for, depending on the audience.
You take control of the narrative scaffolding rather than letting the structural rules of language trip you up.
That is incredibly empowering. So to distill the main points from our exploration today,
Let's recap.
we began with the core mechanics of temporal precision. We have since, our map pin, marking a specific coordinate in the past and forcing the listener to calculate the journey. And we have for, our odometer, which bypasses the math and hands the listener the pure accumulated weight of a continuous span of time.
Right. And we examined the profound cognitive and social tax of choosing one over the other.
We really did.
We discovered that this choice is essentially a decision about where to direct the listener's empathy and attention, whether to the charm of an origin story or the grit of long-term endurance.
And then we analyzed the tragic breakdown of Bruce the woodworker,
Core Bruce.
who demonstrated the immense cognitive friction that occurs when the organic gradient nature of human memory is forced into the rigid, binary constraints of spoken language under social pressure.
Zip fuck.
His inability to cleanly architect his timeline resulted in a false perception of incompetence.
And that breakdown reinforced our ultimate takeaway. Mastering these temporal markers is not about grammatical pedantry.
Definitely not.
It is about eliminating ambiguity so your listener can trust you. Narrative clarity is the proxy for self-awareness.
If you want people to understand you, to invest in your story, you must be able to architect your timeline with absolute precision. Don't leave your listener lost in the woods trying to calculate your history.
Build your scaffolding before you start speaking.
It all comes back to the idea of an unlabeled photograph.
Oh, I like that image.
A picture floating in a void might be interesting, but it lacks gravity.
It has no context.
Exactly. When you add temporal precision, when you can clearly and confidently articulate exactly when an era began or exactly how long a passion has endured, you anchor your identity in reality. You give your listeners solid ground to stand on.
You transform a vague, isolated memory into a shared chronological history.
Beautifully said. So we want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over on your own today.
Something to think about.
Think about the most important passion, the most defining pursuit in your own life right now, the thing that makes you.
You. What is that thing for you?
Exactly. When you explain its history to someone else, do you naturally anchor it to a specific starting point in your past? Or do you measure its significance by the total duration it has been a part of your life?
The map pin or the odometer?
And what does that choice reveal about how you truly view your own personal history?